will call the roll.
Chair Clegg,
Here.
Representative Busey,
Here.
Representative Bureaus,
Here.
Representative Kane,
Here.
Representative Fierro,
Here.
Representative Israel, Representative Middleton,
Here.
Representative Swanson.
Here.
A quorum is present. Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to begin hearing bills. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a couple of housekeeping items. It's my intention to give you the opportunity to be as informed as possible regarding legislation before the committee. I intend to hold bills a minimum of a week before voting on them. You will receive a list of bills, any substitutes, and a brief explanation of any substitutes, along with the suggested calendar before we vote on them. When we begin to vote on bills, it will be our first order of business after gaveling in. Generally, we'll hear bills of non-committee members first. However, today we have a witness who needs to testify in a Senate committee, so to accommodate his schedule and the senator's schedule, we will hear the bills that he is testifying on first. As a reminder, if there's anyone who wishes to testify on any of the bills we will be hearing today, you must register on the electronic witness affirmation kiosk in the hall before you testify and indicate which bills you would like to testify on. If there are no questions, we can start our first bill. We're going to start with House Bill 1067 by Representative Ashby. The chair lays out HB 1067 and recognizes Representative Ashby to explain his bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Good morning. It's glad to see all of you here this morning at work early on a Monday. It's my privilege to lay out to you before you today House Bill 1067. This legislation was brought to me by a constituent who currently serves as the City of Midway City Secretary. Her name is Deborah Newkirk, and she's actually here with me today to provide the committee with some background on why this legislation is needed. This bill would authorize the local entity responsible for preparing ballots in certain elections to omit a deceased candidate from the ballot if the deceased candidate passes away before the ballots are prepared. Members, it's important to note that this legislation would only apply to candidates in general or special elections that are not state or county offices, meaning this bill would only affect local nonpartisan elections. Under current statute, in order to remove a candidate's name from the ballot, the candidate shall have died before midnight of the third day before the filing deadline. Thus, if a candidate were to pass away in the 48 hours before the filing deadline, the candidate's name must be printed on the ballot, even if the ballots haven't been prepared. While this may seem like a rare occurrence, the scenario I just described to you does happen, it did happen, and it can create significant challenges, especially for our smaller localities, when you consider the possible outcomes and the burdensome process of filling a vacancy through appointment or even the significant costs associated with having another election. And I'm going to let Deborah share her story here about what a nightmare this can be a little bit later and further in detail. But before I close, I'd also like to add that we have vetted this bill with the Secretary of State's office, and they find no issue with the language or in the intent of the legislation before you today. So thank you, members, for the opportunity to lay out House Bill 1067. I'll defer to Deborah to be the expert on this, but I would defer my right to close and certainly be happy to entertain any questions at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The chair calls Deborah Newkirk.
Good morning, Madam Chair.
Good morning. Please state your name, who you represent, and your position on the bill, please.
Okay, my name is Deborah Newkirk. I am City Secretary for the City of Midway, represent myself and the city, and I am for this bill. And the reason for being for this bill is we talk about openness and honesty in our election process. It can't be very open and very honest or transparent if you have a deceased person on the ballot, because they can win an election. This happened in the City of Midway last year, and it was a nightmare scenario. So it's difficult when you prepare a ballot and you have a person you know to be gone and people come in to vote and they look at you, and I mean, no disrespect, but this was the look that I got. Seriously? Do you not know this man is dead? Yeah, I was there. Unfortunately, his name is on this ballot, and I could not take it off, playing by the rules that we have before us. It causes a lot of problems in a small town because Midway is a Type B municipality. And as such, any vacancy on the council has to be filled by appointment. We don't exactly have people knocking down the doors to get on the ballots. So the council then has to question, okay, who would want to serve? And you have to go through a process to get those folks in. So I do appreciate your time and consideration in this bill and hope that it passes.
Any questions, members? Representative Swanson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I apologize. I did not get to look it over before this. At what point are you changing? At what point now can you take the person off, and what does the bill change the date to?
Okay, right now, they have to, the end of the filing period was like the middle of February. The person has to pass away by Wednesday of that week to be removed from the ballot. And the ballots aren't even prepared at that point. Your ballots don't have to be printed really ready to go until March. He passed away the day before the ballots were printed, and I could not take him off. This bill would allow that if he passes before that, he can be removed from the ballot. And it's not incurring any expense to anyone because the ballot hasn't been printed.
Okay, my concern is I'm thinking that most likely it was set up the way it is in order to allow time that either people would hear that this deceased person had died and would still have 48 hours to hear and to file. Let's say they would run if that person was not in the race, but they did not want to run with that person on the ballot. So my concern is unless you tie something in that then would reopen the filing deadline, that what you've then done is people end up with someone that they didn't want. Let's say, okay, so two people are running in the race. Person A is the one everybody wants. Nobody likes person B. Okay, person A dies, you take it off, and person B then automatically wins. Whereas if nobody likes person B, like he's a real scoundrel, they can all still at this point vote for person A, and then he wins and is of course declared ineligible, and then you have a new election as opposed to electing someone that no one wanted.
Okay, to address your issue of a second election, Type B municipality, any vacancy on the council must be filled by appointment. There is no special election.
Okay,
That's
but maybe
that's local government code. Okay. As far as someone not being on, not liking their candidate choices, we are at large. Okay, so there were, in the last election, which is what this stemmed from, okay, I had 2 seats. I had 4 people running. So Mr. Cook didn't pass away. We did have 4 people on the ballot for those 2 council positions. Mr. Cook passed away before the ballots were printed, but his name still had to remain on. Okay, so I still had 3 people that they could have voted for. I understand that some people might say, We didn't like the choices. It clearly states on the ballot, per election code, you can vote for 2, 1, or none. Okay, it still creates a vacancy, but you're having openness in there in that these are viable candidates, whereas Mr. Cook was not one.
Okay, what I would say to that, I would suggest, if Representative, if that you would consider also including opening the filing deadline back up, because you really might have a situation where you had two different factions and no one liked some of the people left. Maybe they only liked one that was left over because two had run on one slate and two on another. And perhaps they would prefer to have someone appointed by the rest of the council. But if you extended the filing deadline after the person died and was removed, I think that would solve all the problems. Thank
Ms.
you for
Swanson.
coming up.
Oh, thank
and
you.
I'm sorry for what you went through. That must have been
That was
very...
only a small part. There was a whole lot of other stuff that went on with that, but that was the hardest part.
Well, thank you for serving.
Well, thank you very much.
Members, any other questions on this bill?
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone here wishing to testify on, for, or against? Okay. The chair calls Alan Vera.
Morning, Alan Vera, Chairman, Harris County Republican Party Ballot Security Committee, testifying on HB 1067. We think it addresses an important administrative issue in the ballot preparation. The language is clear and the deadlines are reasonable. However, as with Representative Swanson, we're concerned that there is no reference, provision, or mention of a replacement process. By leaving that open, it invites others to bring in other sections of the code and get us into a haggle as to how that's replaced. So we're on the bill. We think it's moving in the right direction. We recommend there be some provision for replacement or simply a statement that's saying no replacement is possible. Any questions? Thank you.
Any questions, members? Next witness is Christina Atkins. The chair calls her.
Good morning. My name is Christina Adkins, and I'm the Legal Director for the Elections Division with the Texas Secretary of State, testifying on the bill. So if you have any questions, we are available to answer any of those questions you might have.
Are there not other provisions in the code where filing is reopened in the event that a candidate dies or becomes ineligible?
Not for local entities, cities, school districts, water districts. There are some other limited provisions related to that where the filing period might be reopened for a primary election, but not for our local folks.
Good strategy.
Thank you. Members, any questions?
Thank you.
Okay, House Bill 1067 will be left pending. I'm sorry, the chair recognizes Representative Ashby to close.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee, for the opportunity to lay out House Bill 1067 before you this morning. I will readily confess that I have never had the perfect bill. I know that's shocking. I'm still looking for it. But I would say to Representative Swanson, as well as the gentleman who came up to testify on the bill earlier from Harris County, we are always open for recommendations, for suggestions on a committee substitute. So we would be happy to work with you and your staff, as well as any other interested parties, in trying to bring this bill to a consensus bill to where everybody can get behind it. I think we all understand the impetus behind why we think it's necessary to have an option within that 48 hours between the printing of the ballots for local nonpartisan elections and the 3-day filing deadline. So with that, again, thank you for this opportunity, and I appreciate the opportunity to close. Thank you, Madam Chair.
House Bill 1067 will be left pending without objections at this time. And let's see. think we're going to go ahead and lay out House Bill 933 and recognize Representative Busey to explain the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually have a committee substitute for House Bill 933. So, okay.
You'll lay out the original bill and we'll do the substitute.
Okay.
there. But you can explain the differences.
Okay. Well, members, thank you for allowing me the privilege to lay out House Bill 933. HB 933 increases access to information concerning when and where to vote, as well as contact information for elections offices, voter ID requirements, and various required notices concerning the electoral process. All notices are already required under statute. Currently, they are only required to post this information on a bulletin board. HB 933 would require information to be posted on the Secretary of State's website or county's websites, depending on the type of notice. After conversations with stakeholders, the committee substitute addresses the following issues: changing voter information to voting information in the title of the added section 31.016. This is just to more accurately reflect the provisions which require elections office contact information and polling locations and hours to be added to the Secretary of State's website. We also added logic and accuracy tests, which are part of the public testing of voting machines, to be one of the things added to the notices required to be posted on the county's website. We've also allowed permitting counties with no website 6 months to comply from the effective date, and all other counties 1 month from the effective date to comply with respect to posting county elections office information and polling places. And I want to thank you for hearing this bill, and I'm happy to answer any questions, and I reserve the right to close.
Members, are there any questions for Representative Busey? Is there anyone here wishing to testify for, on, or against House Bill 933? Chair recognizes Glenn Maxey.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. I'm Glenn Maxey with the Texas Democratic Party here in support of House Bill 933. In my role at the Texas Democratic Party, I also serve as our primary director, which means that I interact with elected officials in all 254 counties during each of the Democratic primaries. And throughout the last number of cycles, it has been really frustrating that there is no place to get an email address for an election administrator or a county clerk in one place. It seems obvious that the name, the office, if you go to the Secretary of State's website today, you'll find the election administrators and the county clerks, but they don't have an email address listed. They often have a fax number, but that's not exactly the best way in the 21st century to communicate. So having complete information on both the Secretary of State's website and on a county website of election information is very, very helpful. Over the years, this committee and I have worked together to move almost all the primary election stuff onto the internet and onto the SOS website. It's been much more efficient and effective and transparent. Having this information or information out there on websites is the go-to place to find information. If you can find me a voter in Texas today who gets in their car and drives to the courthouse to look at the Commissioner's Court bulletin board to find out when the elections are or where to vote, I'll buy you dinner at your favorite steakhouse. That just is not the way it happens anymore. And secondly, there may be some folks who will tell you that this is an unfunded mandate for a county to have a website. We are 1/5 of the way through the 21st century. If there's a county in Texas who cannot afford a simple WordPress website, I suggest that they go to their local high school and have the high school kids build one and donate it to the county. And if they can't afford the typically about $10 a month for that domain name, they can have a bake sale. It's that simple. This is not this is de minimis cost, and it's the cost of good democracy. If there are any questions, I'll. Thank y'all.
Alan Vera, Chairman, Harris County Republican Party Ballot Security Committee. Put it in your diaries. Glenn Maxey and Alan Vera agree on a bill. This bill creates much-needed changes. Currently, the 12 members of my Ballot Security Committee get up every morning, get in their cars, and drive to all the buildings housing the bulletin boards of every political subdivision in the county. I'm just kidding. We only do it once a week. This bill is just common sense. And the dropping cost of website development and maintenance makes no excuse for any county subdivision to not have a website for an important thing like election. The only thing I wish the author would put in there is enforcement and penalties. As with so many election bills, we forget about who enforces it and what the punishment is for every subdivision that doesn't comply, and they won't comply willingly. So this cleanup is badly needed, and we support moving this bill out of committee. Any questions? Thank you.
The chair calls Cindy Weatherby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am Cindy Weatherby, and I'm testifying as a member and on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Texas in support of House Bill 933, and we welcome the opportunity to talk to you this morning. I had some prepared remarks. Obviously, there's a lot of agreement that this is something that should be pursued. And I do want to take advantage of the opportunity to let you know that we do agree that this is information that the public expects to see, and we have been following that and reviewing the websites of every county that has a county website. There are 20 that don't so far. But I know how busy you are, and I've given you a copy of our recent report that was done from the fall of 2017 that analyzes the election information that's available on each of the county websites. And we had started that a couple of years earlier, and we saw some rapid improvement, and we think that, in fact, from 2016 to 2017, it improved about 50%. There was a little competition because we gave some commendations to counties with good election websites, and that was encouragement, but passage of this bill would be real encouragement to make a difference, and we would ask for your support. One other thing I do want to mention very quickly is also in this little binder that I gave you is a one-pager about our review of the Secretary of State's website. We've worked with them continually, and they've been very receptive to ideas about improving the information available on their two websites, one mostly public-facing and the other for the rest of the people in the state who work on elections. So this is out and available. We've encouraged the involvement of people who would generally go to that website to give us their ideas about that. And if you have other groups that you think might be interested in participating in this, what we're calling scavenger hunt, to find different pieces of information on the Secretary of State's website, we'd appreciate that as well. Thank you.
Members, any questions? Representative Israel.
Good morning, Ms. Weatherby.
Good morning.
Thank you for the information on your survey. I was wondering, did you meet with the Secretary of State's office before you did the survey?
You know, I wasn't personally involved, but we have talked with them about surveys continually.
Okay, I'll ask them later, but I'm just wondering what information the state had and if you were doing duplicating efforts or if this was
I don't believe
not
so.
readily available.
I don't think it's readily. Are you talking about the survey of the Secretary of State's website or the scavenger hunt?
No, the survey of all the counties.
Oh. I'll be honest and say I don't know if we've provided this information to the Secretary of State.
Okay.
And we provided the information to the counties as well. It's posted on our website and I've given you a link to that on what I've provided you.
Okay, thank you.
The counties have been receptive as well to comments. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you. We do have somebody here from the Secretary of State. That Representative Israel has some questions. Could you come up and answer, Christina?
Yes. Christina Adkins with the Secretary of State, testifying on the bill or answering whatever questions you might have, ma'am.
Yes, Miss Adkins, I was wondering, have you met with the League of Women Voters since they did their survey?
We talked to them, I think, right before. We did meet with them right before they were going to be doing the survey. We have not met with them in person to discuss the survey results.
So you haven't
they
met with them
completed it.
since?
No, ma'am.
Do you think this was duplicating efforts, or did you think you had some of this information but not all of it?
We have not done any kind of independent review of county websites. So I think their efforts in reviewing county websites was something our office had not undertaken any kind of efforts to do that. So that was, helpful information that they're passing along. And then I think they're still in the process of getting feedback on our own SOS websites that they're going to pass along to us.
So I was going to ask Ms. Weatherby before she testified, but she indicated there was 20 counties that don't have information online. If I had asked you that, would you have known that?
Yes, and I think because I've been familiar with some of the activities of the League of Women Voters, we have been in discussions with them before. We have generally known that there was about 20 to 25 counties that didn't have county websites.
But you wouldn't have known it before they took it upon themselves to do this project.
I don't know if I first became aware of that number through the League of Women Voters or through some other groups that may have been surveying the websites. I don't recall how I first became aware of that 20 to 25 number, but we knew it was somewhere around there.
Would you remind us how frequently you interact with county elections administrators?
How frequently our office interacts with county elections administrators? Very frequently. I mean, we're talking to people on a daily basis on an individual level, and then in addition to that, we do periodically send out email communications, send out advisories to them, so we do have pretty frequent contact with them.
So if we wanted to carry this further, do you think there'd be some productive use of time by sharing information, since you are the Secretary of State's office, to see what other information we could glean moving forward?
I mean, we're always willing to take feedback from constituent groups, like League of Women Voters, about anything related to our resources that we provide, because we want to make those resources better. So if that's what you mean, then we're definitely open to that kind of feedback. Am I understanding your question correctly, ma'am?
Yeah, I would have thought this would be something that you would have had already. So I'm glad to see that it was done out of their own volition. And I think it'd be helpful for us to know that you guys are going to meet again to keep talking about this product
absolutely.
and what we as a state of Texas could be doing, what those 20 counties are or are not doing. It just seems to me like this is real good information for all of us to have, and I'd like to know that you guys have an interest in maturing it and growing it and making it an ongoing tool.
No, absolutely. We are happy to meet with any other groups, constituent groups or outside groups that want to take an interest in helping us figure out ways to better provide information and resources to our county election officials or our local election officials. So, yeah, absolutely.
Well, no one else has done this. So can I get your assurance that you guys, if it's helpful, would meet again and
With the
talk
League of Women
more about
Voters?
it?
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Chair calls Chris Davis.
Good morning, Madam Chair, committee members. Chris Davis, President of the Texas Association of Election Administrators, testifying on the original filed version of House Bill 933. We recognize the need to modernize the noticing requirements across the state. We've been in contact with the author's office as far as options for his substitute one of the provisions, early part of the originally filed bill, requires entities or themselves to post notices on the county's website. Doesn't exactly happen that way, that cities and school districts have direct access to a county website to post those notices, and the author's office is aware of that. We also asked, both with this bill, other bills today, and going forward in this session, where they're requiring the Secretary of State's office to do more, and in particular to this bill, hundreds of elections, thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of polling places during an election, that they are now going to be tasked with creating and managing a repository for, that the appropriations for the Secretary of State's office be considered, giving them the more to do that, whether it be personnel or resources. And that's it.
Members, any questions?
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Chair calls Brandon Moore.
Madam Chair, members, and guests, thank you very much for your time today. My name is Brandon Moore. I'm the Organization Director for the Republican Party of Texas. I am testifying on HB 933 on behalf of myself today. I would like to echo the sentiments spoken by the previous speakers. I do believe this is a well thought out bill and with great intentions. As Mr. Davis mentioned just a moment ago, there are some concerns about making sure the funding is there for Secretary of State's office and for the counties. If the funding issue is addressed, I think this is an excellent idea. Thank you.
Any questions, members? Okay, that is all of our witnesses. The chair recognizes Representative Busey to close.
Chairman Click, members, HB 933 increases access to information concerning when and where to vote, as well as contact information for elections offices, voter ID requirements, and various required notices concerning the electoral process by requiring that these items be posted online. I appreciate everyone's feedback, and we've been working with lots of the people that have testified today. We're open to continuing to work on this bill, but we think this is very important that we increase access and transparency just so the process is smoother for all of our voters to know when and where and other notifications. So I would appreciate everyone's support. And again, thank you so much for hearing House Bill 933. I close. Thank you.
Representative Israel.
It's my understanding that Mr. Busey this is his first legislative session. And I also understand that this is his first bill. So he may not be aware that he should open himself up for questions and or comments before he just closes on the bill, and we might have some thoughts about his bill.
Can I correct that? I'm open for questions or comments from the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Busey. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Busey, I just wanted to commend you on this bill and thank you for bringing it forward and welcome you to the wonderful world of elections witnesses who we'll be seeing often. But what are the positive impacts of this bill that you see with, I know you've done a lot of work in getting to know all the interested parties, but ultimately, why do you think this bill is needed?
I think at the heart of this, what we're trying to do is just make it easier for individuals to find important election information. And I think especially young people coming into the process, they go to the website. They don't go to newspapers. They don't go to pegboards at the county courthouse. They're going to look online, and that's where they're going to find information. That's where they go for the presidential race. Makes sense to me. As we're trying to bring them in to participating up and down the ballot, this will make information more readily available. And it's not just about when and where, it's just other important information, including learning about how this works, learning how to become an election judge, learning about how the machines work. We hear news articles all the time about this machine didn't work, that machine didn't work. This would allow posting for people to show up and publicly see the election machines in being tested and working and functioning. I think that will help reassure individuals about the process as well, especially dealing with what we've seen on the national level and concerns about voter security. So what I think this really does, it just helps individuals find the information they need easily to engage in the process and really be a better, more informed voter.
Thank you for bringing the bill forward. I think information and sharing information is the most important thing that we can encourage, so I appreciate your bill.
You bet. Thank you.
House Bill 933 will be left pending without objections at this time. And we'll go on to House Bill 1238. Chair lays out House Bill 1238 and recognizes Representative Busey to explain the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Thank you for allowing me the privilege to lay out House Bill 1238. House Bill 1238 would require the Secretary of State to post a database on their website containing information about each candidate for and holder of any elected office in the state. House Bill 1238 would subsequently expand the current candidate and office holder database to include candidates and elected officials at the local level, such as mayors, city councils, and school boards. This information is required to be relayed to the Secretary of State by the relevant authorities in a manner prescribed by their office. After conversations with stakeholders, the committee substitute that we have laid out would address the following issue, which is to add language that would allow the Secretary of State to accept a donation in order to comply with the bill's provisions. I want to thank you for hearing this bill, and I'm happy to answer any questions and reserve the right to close.
Members, are there any questions for Representative Busey? Okay, the chair calls Glenn Maxey to testify.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Glenn Maxey, Texas Democratic Party, in support of this bill. Approximately 3 sessions ago, the Elections Committee and the Legislature adopted an online system for the filing of primary candidates. So up until that time, everything was done on paper. You had no way to proof whether candidates' applications were going from county chairs to the county clerk. Ballots got printed, and then we just discovered that people's names were misspelled, that people were left off the ballot. There was no way for a candidate or the public to know how that process was going along. Now, as a county chair accepts an application, they must immediately post that information on the Secretary of State's website in a public setting. You'll have legislation later this year, this session, to update that system so that third-party candidates and write-in candidates will be on the Secretary of State's website. It is now a seamless system. It follows to me that the chief election officer of the state of Texas should have a database of people running for office at all levels, so that the same kind of system can be in place where people can go and find out who's running for their school board or their city council. There are thousands upon thousands of entities that hold elections in this state. Quite frankly, the Secretary of State has no idea who they are. There is no master list. Most of these counties, if we're thinking about counties, don't have websites. Many of these towns and townships do not have a website, and so there is no public place where candidates running for office or the elections and election dates are. So this bill is a major step forward. I appreciate that Mr. Busey is adding a statement that the Secretary of State can accept donations. There are civic-minded groups, nonprofits, that are offering their services to build these databases and donate them to the state, so that the state does not incur the cost of the development of these kinds of databases. I think this is a huge improvement for the public, and I hope you will look upon it favorably.
Any questions, members?
I have a question, Madam Chair.
Representative Israel?
Thank you. Mr. Maxey, I'll ask others as well, but I'm wondering, do you know of any states that have these similar, this similar set of information readily available online?
Well, I don't, but I would assume that Texas is one of the only states that has this sort of disjointed situation of local counties and local governments being the election offices. You know, in most states, the Secretary of State actually runs the primaries, not the county parties and the county clerks. So I would imagine in states where the Secretary of State is the election administrator for all elections, that they would have this kind of, system.
Members, any other questions of the witness?
Thank you.
Thank you. The chair calls Alan Vera.
Alan Vera, Chairman, Harris County Republican Party Ballot Security Committee, testifying on HB 1238. We find nothing inherently wrong with creating a centralized website database of elected officials and candidates from across Texas. We think that's a good thing. However, in the bill as currently worded is the following. Section 2, Section 52003 Election Code is amended by adding subsection D to read as follows. A candidate's name may not be printed on the ballot until the candidate's name appears on the Secretary of State's internet website as a candidate for elected office under Section 31.015. We believe the committee should carefully study the possible unintended consequences of that particular section. It's not a problem for people running on partisan elections. They're going to make the Secretary of State's website just fine. But in local nonpartisan elections, MUD districts, school boards, ESDs, etc., there could be a problem because that section says that even if a local candidate met all the requirements to run for office, met all the filing deadlines, etc., he, she could be denied a place in the ballot because of a clerical error or an oversight that left their name and the officer seeking off the website. I can think of a couple of ISDs who might deliberately leave a candidate off the website so they wouldn't be able to be on the ballot. This would not be fair to the candidates, the local election authority, or the voters. And since that situation would give an unfair advantage to the incumbent whose name was already on the site as an office holder, litigation would be likely. There would be serious consequences were this situation come to pass. So we recommend and request the committee carefully study that particular section of the bill, anticipate the unintended consequences, and make whatever committee substitutes are necessary to avoid those unintended consequences. Thank you. Any questions?
Members, any questions? Representative Cortez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you're saying that based on your reading of the bill, that if their name's just not on the ballot, they could be kicked off or kicked out of the race? If their name's not on the website?
That's what Section D says. A candidate's name may not be printed on the ballot until the candidate's name appears on the Secretary of State's internet website as a candidate for elected office under Section 31015.
Even though they've met all the other requirements
That's
of
what the bill
age,
says. That's my concern.
filing fee,
Yeah.
residency requirements, etc.
That's a concern, and someone's going to take that literally, and so we recommend you massage it to avoid the unintended consequences.
I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Thank you for your testimony on that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions, members?
Thank you.
The chair calls Cindy Weatherby.
My name is Cindy Weatherby, and I'm testifying as a member and on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Texas. And we're speaking in support of House Bill 1238. And thank you for the opportunity to be here this morning. I think there's general consensus that you've heard from others that this is good information that the public have. And we'll just add one other reason to that, and that is we have difficulty finding accurate information to be able to reach the candidates to provide them the questions for our voters guide. And that's really helpful to us. We've got a whole team of sleuths that try to find that information, and we track that down. But this would be amazing to have it all in one place in some way that we could get information to every single candidate. And especially in the local races, that's a difficult thing to come across sometimes. So we'd appreciate your consideration of passage of this bill.
Members, any questions? Thank you. The chair calls Chris Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, Chris Davis, on behalf of the Texas Association of Election Administrators, testifying on House Bill 1238. Reflecting pretty much what Mr. Vetta said, we'd be for this bill, but for that section at the end of the bill. This is much more than proposing a database. This is pretty much proposing almost a certification process without really being a certification process, without deadlines. It's preventing entities like ourselves, county election officers, from actually printing the ballot until these hurdles are met, and inserting kind of a middleman. We contract as county election officers with the entities, with the parties, with the cities, with the school districts directly. They are the filing authority. They tell us who's qualified and who is not qualified to be on the ballot that they are contracting us to prepare and administer. This would introduce an unknown delay as well with this middleman process, these entities having to submit the names and we're not able to print them on the ballot. And it prevents us from being for. We're testifying on it. We're hopeful that this be addressed in any substitute language.
Members, any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
The chair calls Brandon Moore.
Madam Chair, members, and guests, thank you once again. Brandon Moore, testifying on this bill on behalf of myself. Would like to echo the concerns that Mr. Vera and Mr. Davis mentioned as well. I think those are some concerns that would like to see addressed. A couple other things that I would also bring to the forefront to ask questions about. As I read the bill, it seemed to me that it would pertain to all elections, whether public elected office, private elected office, such as a party office, perhaps even extend to HOAs, boards of directors, etc. I don't know for certain if that's the case, but if it is, I would love to see that it would be limited to public elected office. I would love to see a database like that for public elected office. I've spent the past few weeks trying to build one myself so that we can just see what those offices are, who holds them, when they're up. To that point, one other data point I would love to see included in this is whether the term was a full or unexpired term. That would be also very helpful as well. The final point that I would like to address is, what was already brought forth about the funding issue. If that's addressed, then I think this is an excellent idea. Thank you.
Members, any questions? Thank you. The chair calls Christina Atkins.
Hello. Christina Adkins with the Secretary of State's office, testifying on the bill.
Members, any questions for Secretary of State? Representative Burrows.
So I have some questions about the fiscal note, and I'm just trying to figure out. I get the initial requirement looks in 2020 to be about building the website and the database, but it's $283,000 each and every year for the continuing gathering of this information. How do y'all come up with that figure?
Sure. Let me walk you through the steps that we got to get there.
Sure.
So first of all, I started looking into, when this bill first saw that it was filed, started looking into trying to find a list of all of the publicly available, or using publicly available data, all the political subdivisions that we have in the state of Texas. And so looking at just public sources, looking at TEA, the Census Bureau, TCEQ, trying to determine how many political subdivisions we're talking about, I could come up with over 5,000, and that does not include things like library districts, hospital districts, emergency services districts, entities that don't have a singular agency that corrals all of that data for those groups. So we're talking at a minimum of 5,000, but really much more than that. For the primary election itself, we do have a database that has candidate listings for the primary itself. So when you think about the primary, we have 254 times 2, about 500 elections that are going on during that time period. For the primary filing period, and for a good month or so afterwards, as we're dealing with corrections to the ballot, changing the names, pulling off candidates that shouldn't be on the database itself, we have 3 to 4 full-time employees in our office that exclusively work on that filing system. And that's just for that short window dealing with the primary election. So if we're going to start servicing all elections that are out there with some kind of filing system, kind of a quasi-certification system like Mr. Davis alluded to, then we're talking about a substantial amount of work for employees year-round, because as you all know, we're always having an election in some way, shape, or form here in Texas.
So how many employees are you anticipating needing to bring on just to handle this database project?
I believe in the fiscal note we said, I want to say it was maybe 4 full-time employees, just to help maintain the information, because in addition to facilitating the filing process itself and maintaining the information related to each election, we also are going to have to try to find all of these entities that are out there, because we have communications with the political subdivisions that we know about, but there's a lot that we just don't know about, that don't reach out to our office and don't interact with us. So we would also have to try to locate them so that they don't run into issues that some of the other individuals that have testified on related to Section 2.
Could we do anything to put the onus on them to reach out to y'all? I mean, I assume if they're going to be holding elections and having public office, I mean, really, the burden should be on there as any sort of carrot or stick that we could make sure they're communicating to y'all and you're not having to find them.
So something that makes it more voluntary, like a voluntary participation. Is that more what
No,
you're
I think
asking?
it's the other way around.
Oh.
I mean, I think if they're going to be holding public elections and doing all of this, I mean, shouldn't the onus be on them to find y'all and track you down, not the other way around? I mean, don't they need you? Is there a way to incentivize them to come find you or penalize them if they don't?
I'm not sure that there is something that we could think of. I know that that's what Section 2 of the bill, where it was talking about not letting them have their name on the ballot, that I think that was intended to provide incentive.
But that's the penalties against the candidate, not necessarily
Correct.
against the political entity.
Correct. And I'm not sure what else we could do that would push entities into compliance in this area.
But speaking of the enforcement provisions, when we say y'all shall do something, you're going to do it because that's a directive, correct?
Of course.
And then, of course, the other part that we've had some testimony on, that's only affecting the person who wants to seek office, not really the political subdivision that's not actually complying.
Well, I think the concern with that section is that if you have entities that aren't even aware that this requirement is out there and they're not listing their election or listing their candidates on the website, then you run the risk of them having an election that kind of has a cloud of suspicion over their election or could potentially invalidate the results of their election. So I think that's the concern there, that, while that impetus might be on them to participate and to comply, it still could potentially put their election at risk.
Do you have the ability to do, fines and sanctions against political subdivisions that actually do not comply or don't seek out?
No, sir. We're not an enforcement agency. We do not have that kind of authority.
Okay. Thank you.
Members, any other questions? Representative Fierro?
Yes, sir.
So your testimony right now, I think, even adds more reasons for us to consider this bill. Are you in agreement with that?
On the excuse me, on the bill itself, the idea that's there, we don't disagree as to whether or not this is a good idea. I think that there is a lot of value in what you're trying to do here. Our concern is the cost and the limited resources that we have in being able to implement and maintain something like this. That's the primary issue for us.
I just want to clarify that. Thank you.
Members, any other questions? Alrighty, thank you.
Okay.
The chair recognizes Representative Busey to close.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Myself and my office will be eager to work with the concerned parties about Section 2 and figure out what we can do to make sure that we can solve that concern, while also remembering that I think it's crucially important to have this type of information available to our voters. I think the transparency, knowing who our elected officials are across the state, knowing who our candidates for elected office are across the state is vital to the process. And if our agencies are having a hard time finding the information, and if the League of Women Voters are having a hard time finding the information, imagine what a new voter, the struggle they would go through to try to figure out who all the candidates are, who is running, where to find it. So I think what we're trying to do here is increase that access. I think it's vital. But I hear the concerns, and I'm eager to work with the parties to make sure we can address those and get this bill through with those changes. So thank you for the time. I'd like to open up to any further questions from the dais.
The chair recognizes Representative Middleton.
Thank you, Representative Busey. We met on this the other day, and I definitely appreciate the spirit on it, but I do have concerns about using state resources to essentially promote political candidates on the local level. And at the end of the day, if people can't find out who the candidates are, it's really the candidate's fault. they need to make their voters aware that they're running for office. So I do have some concerns about using state money on this. I'd be happy to work with you on that to address those concerns.
I appreciate that.
And thank you for meeting with me too, by the way, the other day.
Any other questions, members? Okay. House Bill 1238 will be left pending without objection at this time. The chair lays out House Bill 88 and recognizes Representative Swanson to explain the bill.
Thank you, Chairwoman Click and committee members. House Bill 88 is a simple change to the election code that will modify the method used to determine the position of candidate names on a ballot in a runoff election held for a special election or to resolve a tie. Currently, if an election results in a tie or if a special election is sent to a runoff, election officials must post notice of a new random drawing for ballot names 24 hours before conducting the drawing. Then they must draw ballot names at random again to set the order of the ballot. Doing so is inefficient and creates a delay in preparing the ballots. In 2017, the legislature changed this process for primary election runoffs through HB 1735, but we did not make this change for special elections or elections ending in a tie. Keeping the relative order of names on the ballot would allow election officials to begin the process of preparing the new ballots immediately. As election officials can attest, many things must take place between Election Day and the runoff election date, including the preparation of overseas ballots, which must be mailed 45 days before the election, and the preparation and the performance of a new logic and accuracy test, amongst other things. It has been expressed to my office that the extra 24 to 48 hours gained from not having to conduct a new drawing would be very beneficial to election officials and significantly increase efficiency in the process while alleviating some of the time crunch placed on them. This bill will increase efficiency and improve the balloting process by removing the second drawing. Additionally, I've been informed by the Secretary of State's office that they are in favor of this bill. I am happy to answer any questions you have and appreciate Chairwoman Click and members. I respectfully reserve to my right to close. Thank you.
Members, any questions for Representative Swanson? The chair calls Ed Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ed Johnson. Here is, I guess, testifying a former county employee that used to work in elections. I'm now retired. So in the past, this bill passed last session helped tremendously. It doesn't save just 24 hours. It actually gives the county about a week.
Can you give me your position and who you're representing?
I'm representing myself. Oh, I'm for, excuse me, for the bill. This is kind of a cleanup. It was for the primary. It saves more than 24 hours. It actually saves about a week's time because when the election's over with, there's about a week that you're in, unless it's a really close election, you're waiting for the canvass to happen, waiting for the provisional ballots to get counted, and waiting for the canvass to happen. 99% of the time you know who the winners are, and you can start formulating the ballot to get it ready so that, when day one happens after the canvass, you can start the logic and accuracy test and then proceed on with getting the overseas ballots mailed out. That's the big crunch in the election world, is trying to get the overseas ballots mailed 45 days before the election, after going through all the steps of the logic and accuracy test. So it's a great bill.
Members, any questions of Mr. Johnson? Thank you.
Thank you.
The chair calls Alan Vera.
Alan Vera, Chairman, Harris County Republican Party Ballot Security Committee, testifying for HB 88. In Harris County, we had the November general election, followed by a runoff, followed by a special election to replace someone who had won the November election, followed by a runoff for that election, followed by another special election to replace the person who replaced the other person, and now another runoff election. We have it all the time in a county that big. This bill would save us a lot of time and a lot of money. We recommend its passage. Thank you. Any questions?
Any questions, members? Thank you. Chair calls Christina Atkins.
Hello, Christina Adkins with the Secretary of State's office, testifying on the bill.
Any questions, members? Thank you. The chair recognizes Representative Swanson to close.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I appreciate all of your members' support on this bill. Feel that it will be greatly helpful to our elections officials, and I close on my bill. Thank you.
House Bill 88 will be left pending without objection at this time. The chair lays out House Bill 273 and recognizes Representative Swanson to explain the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, committee members. I do have a committee substitute for this bill. The substitute will simply alter my current proposed change from the 38th day to the 37th day. After filing the bill, we realized that the day was off by one, so we're making this simple change to fix that. However, the substitute was not received by my office before the deadline to submit them last Friday. In 2017, Senate Bill 5 in the special session by Senator Hancock and Representative Goldman passed. It included an amendment reducing the number of days before a mail-in ballot must be sent to a voter from the 38th day to the 30th day before the election. However, a needed corresponding change in another section was inadvertently omitted. When an application for a mail ballot is received, the balloting materials shall be mailed to the voter within 7 days, unless it is prior to 45 days before Election Day. Then it is not necessary to mail until 30 days before Election Day. This language leaves a gap for those ballot applications received after 45 days and before 30 days. And if you are totally confused, imagine elections officials trying to keep up with this. Consequently, for example, an application received on the 45th day before an election is required to have the balloting materials mailed by the 30th day before the election. In contrast, an application received on the 44th day before the election must have the balloting materials sent out by the 36th day before the election. This forces election officials to unfairly prioritize later applications over earlier applications. This was an unintended consequence of the amendment on Senate Bill 5 in the special session 2 years ago, requiring election officials, therefore, to closely monitor the dates that mail-in ballots are received so the applications because the applications must be treated differently. This results in confusion and extra workloads for election officials. This bill will include the change that was left out in the amendment to Senate Bill 5 special session 2 years ago, changing the 45th day to the 37th once we have our committee sub. By doing so, House Bill 273 will increase efficiency and reduce the workload of election officials by alleviating the time crunch election officials are under to get ballots out in time after the ballot is finalized. In addition to that, House Bill 273 will allow election officials to properly stagger the mailing of domestic ballots over a period of days, making ballot harvesting more difficult since ballots would arrive in mailboxes on different days and be less predictable. Thank you, Chairwoman Click and members. I am happy to answer any questions you have, and I respectfully reserve my right to close. By the way, House Bill 273 is supported by the Secretary of State.
Members, any questions for Representative Swanson? The chair calls Ed Johnson to testify.
Ed Johnson, representing myself, and I'm for the bill. Came to testify on this one because this is cleanup from last session. This is a bill that I helped push and promote, and unfortunately a little section of the code got left out, and it did make things very confusing because ballots that were received after 45 days had to be mailed out sooner than the ballots before. The whole intent of this bill was that it seemed to us that senior citizens, well, let me back up. The MOVE Act that required ballots to be mailed 45 days overseas actually had an effect where we used to mail local ballots 30 days before the election. It moved it back to where you were mailing local ballots 38 days before the elections. We noticed that a lot of seniors receiving the ballots so early didn't know who they were voting for, would put it aside and lose their ballot. So they were asking for, had to request for a replacement ballot. I did some statistics before I retired from the office, and it actually reduced the number of replacements in this last election by about 2%. So it did have a little bit of a change in effect. There is this little hole here that makes it very confusing, so by plugging this, all local ballots would be mailed in 30 days before the election.
Members, any questions? Representative Swanson?
Yes, Mr. Johnson, would you also address the problem that Harris County ran into when you had so many ballots coming out close together that sometimes people would return them in the wrong envelope, and what the result was of that?
Okay. Yes, a little different subject. This has to do with the primary elections. And we have a primary election, we have a May uniform election, then we have a primary runoff election. And a lot of these seniors, this helped eliminate that problem a little bit by not having the ballots overlap between the primary election at the 1st of March and the May election at the 1st of May by having a 30-day window instead of a 38-day window to mail. If the voter gets both ballots at the same time, and a lot of seniors are very conservative and they want to save postage, they would place the ballots in one envelope to return them. Well, only one ballot gets counted that way. Unfortunately, you have to return them in the envelope that they came in because they're all serial numbered and marked. So that requires sending them another replacement ballot and another envelope to have them mail it back in. So by having it limited to 30 days does help the overlap in elections.
And isn't it true that you also had trouble that they would swap the envelopes and send them backwards the other way?
You get all kind of mix-ups. They have multiple ballots and multiple envelopes. They get the wrong ballot in the wrong envelope, and unfortunately that doesn't work.
And they invalidated both their ballots that way?
Yes, they did.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Anybody else? Questions?
Thank you.
The chair calls Alan Vera.
Alan Vera, Chairman, Harris County Republican Party Ballot Security Committee, testifying for HB 273. I was one of those waving red flags on SB 5 last time, but we kind of got run over, and this glitch was left in there. We support this bill. It doesn't have any negative effect on our overseas military voters. We hope you pass it out of committee. Thank you.
Any questions, members? The chair calls Christina Atkins, Secretary of State, Office.
Hi, Christina Atkins with the Texas Secretary of State, testifying on the bill.
Any questions, members? Thank you. Okay, House Bill 273. The chair recognizes Representative Swanson to close.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would ask for support from the chairman and all the members for this cleanup bill that will greatly increase efficiency and will cause less confusion. So I close on my bill. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Cortez.
Representative Swanson, just for my clarification one more time for the record, this would not impact any of our overseas military?
Correct. This is simply for domestic ballots.
Okay.
And to correct a problem last time, as you heard, where we fixed it for some ballots, but not for others of the domestic ballots.
Okay, and that's important, obviously, for our veterans. I represent a large veteran population there in Bexar County, and so they rely on these. And actually, 3 years ago when I was deployed, also overseas, I used a mail ballot, so I wanted to make sure.
Absolutely. This does not affect the overseas ballots.
Thank you for this bill.
Thank you,
Madam Chair.
House Bill 273 will be left pending without objection at this time. The chair lays out House Bill 1048 by Representative Guillen and recognizes Representative Guillen to explain the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, I don't know about y'all, but I haven't voted on Election Day in a very long time. I make it a point every election to vote on the very first day, if at all possible, of early voting. And in my community, to vote early in the general election, I have to go down to the county courthouse to vote. To vote for the city election, I usually have to go to the old city hall. To vote for the school district election or for the school district bond election, I usually have to go down to the school campus. The community college election, to their campus. The hospital district election, to their hospital. This situation certainly is not unique to my community and can be further manipulated by moving around the polling places from year to year. This is very tough on voters. It's unfair and usually results in less participation. HB 1048 designates the early voting polling places of political subdivisions to be at the same location as the general election early voting polling places. It does not, however, keep political subdivisions from opening additional early voting polling places if they so choose. The passage of this bill, HB 1048, is vital to ensure that these types of games and voter suppression techniques are no longer a factor in Texas elections. Now, answer any questions if you have.
Members, any questions? I have one. The elections that you listed, are those all held on the same date?
They have in the past. At some point, there was a point where some were moved. They had an opening where you can move them from either May to November or November to May, and some did some moving around, and so not all of them are. I think a couple of them are in May now. But if they get the chance to move them back to November one of these years, I don't know if they can on their own. I think the legislation has to allow them, but I'm not certain about that. Then, you would have the same situation.
So do those entities, your school board, your city, do they contract with the county, or are they conducting their own elections?
Most all of them conduct their own elections. They have bought their own equipment, and they do it on their own. That's the way it is, which obviously is a big waste of taxpayer dollars when they could combine them and not have to buy so much equipment and have so many people working elections. But that's a whole different issue. Yeah.
Any other members with questions? Okay.
All right.
The chair call, I'm sorry,
do have
Representative
one.
Swanson.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Representative Guillen, I'm in total agreement with you about this problem. It's always been very infuriating. I guess my concern would be, what would they do if the particular location did not want to contract with them?
So there was a case where the county tried to say, hey, you can't use our location or our property to have a polling place. It went to court, and the court ruled they had to allow them to use it. And so I think there's already essentially case law that says if a political subdivision wants to use your space, they've got to be able to use it.
Okay, so my question would be, if it's not held at the same time, let's say
Then this doesn't.
it only applies if it's held at the same time.
Right.
Okay,
Then this
because
doesn't
otherwise a church or someplace might say, no, that doesn't work for us. Okay, sounds
Right.
good.
This would essentially only affect the November election, the general election, because you don't have a general election going on in May. So this would only impact the November elections.
Okay, well, I could see it being May also, like if some entities are holding it, if something is being held by the county, and then these other locations would have to have their early voting at that same place that where the county elections are being held. Is that correct?
We can get the Secretary of State to answer that. I'm not aware of any. I guess they could have some kind of other election in May, but I'm not aware of any of them. So.
Well, in Harris County, the different entities have a choice, like the school districts and the local ones have a choice whether to contract with the county, or in Harris County, it's the county clerk, or whether to hold them on their own. And so it would be a good thing. In May, it would help in Harris County because it would say to the ESDs, the school districts, that even if you don't contract with the county, you have to have it at the same early voting place. So I really
right.
like that.
If there was some kind of a special election that the county was having in May, and you had other political subdivisions also having elections at the same time, then yeah, it would apply.
Sounds like a great bill.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
The chair calls Glenn Maxey.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members. Glenn Maxey, Texas Democratic Party, in support of House Bill 1048. I just wanted to put on the record that our hotlines that we use for the general election for the Democratic Party historically have all had complaints of voters who were misinformed or uninformed until they went to their polling place to find out that the county polling place was not being used in a rural county. It's my supposition that these decisions are made on their own because the higher voter turnout is where the governor's election or the presidential election is happening, and the district or the school board or the city has on purpose had their early voting at a different location to have fewer voters participate. In other words, picking only the most informed voters to come. And so anything that would relieve the voters' problems of having to go to two locations. I think in Medina County in 2016, we had many, many complaints there of people having to drive as much as a 50-mile round trip in order to vote in the two elections at two separate locations. If there are any questions.
Members, any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. The chair calls Chris Davis.
Madam Chair, members, Chris Davis, Texas Association of Elections Administrators, testifying on House Bill 1048. Part of the existing code 85.010 that 1048 seeks to amend states in a section that a political subdivision that holds an election shall designate as an early voting polling place for the election any early voting polling place established by the county and located in the political subdivision on that November uniform election date. That any early voting place established by the county before the hearing began, SOS Legal Director Christina Atkins and I were arm wrestling on what any meant. I'd read any as it already allow or restricts political subdivisions from they must make any or all early voting polling places established by the county theirs as well. And if that's the case, House Bill 1048 doesn't really change anything. Christina Atkins was reading it as any being any one early voting polling place established by the county, the poly sub must honor as an early voting polling place. She's an attorney. I'm not one. I don't even play one on TV. So we're going with her reading. This does move the ball forward. We wish it moved the ball forward further in that it did prohibit the poly sub from only using the established early voting places by the county, so voters don't become confused, because given that they can still, under the unless clause in the bill, those voters will still have to go to a second place, the one established by the county, and they'll probably blame the department or the division that has elections in their title, the county elections office or the elections administrator's office. But we applaud the author for moving the ball forward, and we hope that we can eventually move it to where a voter can vote for all the elections they qualify for at one place.
Members, any questions? Mr. Davis, is this in some ways an effort to do like a joint election?
Well, we as county elections officers, Madam Chair, we define joint election where, you know, all the players at the table, the participating entities, have a say in it. It's a move in that direction, I guess. Uniformity, and relieving the burden on voters, but still, that entity still has to prepare their ballot, tabulate their ballot, perhaps lease equipment from the county elections office, but they still have quite a bit of autonomy.
Any questions, members? The chair calls Alan Vera.
Alan Vera, Chairman, Harris County Republican Party Ballot Security Committee, testifying on HB 1048. One of the greatest frustrations reported to us by voters on a uniform election day is having to find and travel to multiple unfamiliar polling locations being used by political subdivisions like school districts, MUDs, ESDs, etc. But the overwhelming majority of those complaints come in the May uniform election day, not the November one. This bill is clearly a step in the right direction, but it hits only the tip of the confusion iceberg. Because it's a change of TEC 85010, it only addresses the November uniform election date. And at least in the largest county in Texas, the big confusion is in May. The structure of the bill is helpful, it's welcomed, but it misses the biggest problem we have, and that's the May election date when most of these subdivisions have their elections. As a footnote, the last full paragraph of the bill as currently worded is a bit hard to understand and open to interpretation. We recommend the committee take a look at that and make sure it's not subject to more than one interpretation. Let's include the May uniform election date, improve the clarity of the last sentence, and we can get behind this bill. Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Christina Adkins with the Secretary of State's office, testifying on the bill.
Members, any questions? Representative Swanson, did you have a question for Secretary of State?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Not really. I would agree that our problem in Harris County is the May elections, and so I would urge the representative to make a few tweaks to his bill, but definitely agree with the gist of it. Thank you.
Any other questions, members? Thank you.
Thank you.
The chair recognizes Representative Guillen to close.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, I don't have a problem with trying to address the May election. I mean, in the spirit of what we're doing here, it falls right in place. So that's absolutely fine with me. We directed this to address the situation that we were seeing, and so I'd be glad to work with y'all to address that situation as well. The reason that we did not, the reason that we put that last part of the bill where we say, unless each eligible county polling place located in the political subdivision is designated as an early voting polling place by the political subdivision, is to leave a situation where, so for example, in Starr County, you've got a school district that's located in an area where there hasn't traditionally been an early voting polling place put there for the general election. And so if we made it, if we made the mandate strict enough, as someone mentioned, then they would only have the ability to put their polling place at the general election polling places, which could be 20, 30 miles away, and not have the ability to have their own polling place in their little town. You have situations like that in rural areas where you've got little towns out in the outskirts where they don't have an early voting polling place set up by the county. And so we want to give them the opportunity to have their polling place in addition to complying with the county or with this bill. And so that's why we worded it that way. And we've worked back and forth with the Secretary of State's office on the language to make sure it was just right. I actually passed the bill several sessions ago that put the current language in place, and it was only after that we realized that we didn't do it right. And so here we are again. I will say that Representative Fallon at the time, now Senator Fallon, he did work on this, I think, in either last session or in one of the previous sessions, and it got stuck somewhere along the way. But we're picking up where he left off. I'd greatly appreciate your favorable consideration. Thank you. And if there's no further questions, I close.
Any questions, members? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, members, that concludes our testimony for today. House Bill 1048 will be left pending. Any questions or announcements? The Committee on Elections is now adjourned.